This podcast is recorded on the traditional lands of the Kulin Nation. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land and pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. We extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples listening today.
Hello and welcome to Give and Toke Cannabis Conversations, the show that aims to elevate the conversation about cannabis to a higher level. I'm your host Paul, and today we welcome to the show Will Stolk. Will is fast becoming one of Australia's most prolific cannabis activists, responsible for stunts including projecting pro-cannabis messages on the Sydney Harbour Bridge and Opera House, leading to his arrest. He was also behind this year's war-themed 420 protest, taking army tanks through downtown Sydney to mock the failed war on drugs and ask the question when it comes to cannabis, who are we hurting? Will is the creative director of Ballin' on a Budget Media and People Like Us Creative, along with being the founder of Byron-based CBD and a partner in Tioga Green, a cannabis dispensary in California. He also hosts the Willy's World podcast. He is an ex-professional skier, his dad made Mexican restaurants a thing in Australia, and his mum's cousin was in AC/DC. He's recovered from a broken back twice, and Maxim, Yahoo and High Times have labelled him one of Australia's kings of cannabis. If you like what you hear on today's show, please be sure to subscribe on your podcast platform of choice. But for now, please enjoy my conversation with Will Stolk. In your LinkedIn bio, you describe yourself as an international man of mystery. I'm going to go out on a limb here and assume that you're not a professional Austin Powers impersonator. So what does that mean to you?
Yeah, well, that kind of goes with the territory of all the random things that I've been doing over the last 15 plus 20 years. You know, if you go through my history, I used to be a professional skier before, and I've been involved in cannabis culture for probably about 10 years now. Like officially probably for about 4 to 5 years. And actually, no, officially as an activist. And we've been doing publicity stunts for about 8 years now. Time flies, eh?
It does. It goes by very, very quickly. So in the guise of being an international man of mystery, where in the world is your favorite place to consume cannabis?
Probably Humboldt County, or a place in Vancouver Island called Campbell River. It's the first place I ever got bubble hash when I was probably about 18. That's where the Hells Angels headquarters is for all of Canada. And so I met some cultivation people through a friend of mine, and that was pretty amazing. I've smoked some really good stuff over the years though. Switzerland's got some pretty good pot too. Australia's all right, not bad. Like there's some good stuff around. It's just not real consistent, you know. But comparatively to like Northern California and like British Columbia, like if you meet real heads, it's just ridiculous, you know.
That is the really interesting thing in BC right now, that while Canada has federal legalization, it has wiped out that culture of that authentic BC bud. So you really do need to know the people behind the scenes and kind of under the grid that do have that best weed. Yeah,
but there's always been good weed around in those parts of the world. It's pretty synonymous for having the best. And it's, they call it Amsterdam for a reason.
Definitely. Well, it's a pretty wonderful place, and I was lucky to spend a couple of years there with their amazing weed. So, look, I know you've been quite busy, and I'm really grateful for your time, and I know you're dealing with lawyers, planning more publicity stunts. So I guess it's best to hear it from the horse's mouth. What is on your plate at the moment?
We're in the phase of doing a money raise for my holding company, which is called Byron-based CBD. That kind of holds all of our investments that we've done in the cannabis space in California and abroad in Europe. We haven't really partaken in Australia as of yet in an entrepreneurial kind of business sense yet. We're working on that. That's kind of probably phase 2. We're dealing with the court case where we got charged for displaying or distributing an advertisement on Opera House grounds. So we got arrested for that. I got locked up for about 6 or 7 hours. I was on bail. I'm still on bail, actually. My original bail conditions were that I wasn't allowed within 3 kilometres of the Sydney CBD. I wasn't allowed to communicate with Alec Craze Zamet, my co-accused, as they so-called call it, my friend the other half of Who Are We Hurting. I had to sign in at the cop station up here in Tweed Heads 3 times a week for about 3 months because we couldn't get a court date to be able to discuss it with the judge, because obviously the cops can't get rid of the bail charges. Only the judge can do that. So because the courts were all backed up with COVID, we had to do that. So it's been a really big pain in the ass. But, obviously we did do something pretty extreme. So when you do extreme stuff, there are ramifications for your actions. But we feel that Craze and I and all the people that I work with and who we heard in collective, including Jenny and a bunch of our other really good friends, Miguel and all sorts of people like that. We really appreciate all the people that have kind of contributed towards what we're trying to do. We believe that this message needs to be kind of spoken. And, as Scott Morrison said, why not put it on the biggest billboard we have?
We're definitely going to dig further into your cannabis business ventures as well as your political advocacy as the show goes on. But I'd first like to understand your relationship with cannabis. Why are you fighting so hard to legitimize its use, and what is your personal relationship with it?
I love cannabis. I've been smoking weed since I was probably 16. I used to be a pro skier, and freestyle skiing was based off Bohemian culture, which obviously is heavily involved with cannabis and cannabis smoking and just all the kind of facets of stoner culture. Growing up in ski towns all over the world, most of my friends that I made were from smoking weed or going on missions to try and find weed. So we had a pretty big habit of smoking, an ounce or two a week. So when you're in foreign countries, it's pretty hard to find that amount of weed. So we went on all sorts of journeys, and some were fruitful and others weren't. And, I met a lot of interesting cats on those journeys. And, when I used to live in New Zealand, down days, it was so windy and stuff up on the mountain because there's no trees. We just go driving and just go to different smoke spots all around the South Island. And I lived there for almost 10 years. So you can imagine how many road missions we've gone on to go smoke a joint in some random beach in the middle of nowhere, So I don't smoke nearly as much as I used to because I think some of the strains make me a little bit lazy. When it's crunch time for business and for making things happen, for me personally, I think it's better that I don't smoke weed. When I'm busy, I try not to have weed in my possession because if there's an ounce jar sitting there, I'm just going to go, oh, hello. And I'm going to smoke it, right? I have a level of control that I don't need it, but then I like it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But that's just my personal use. Obviously other people have different opinions and it affects them differently because of their chemistry. Some people I've heard, smoking really hardcore indicas makes them have more energy, which is really strange to me. But, that's is the way it is. It became a really big part of my identity as I got a little bit older. And then basically I identified as a stoner. It was kind of my thing that that kind of who I was. And obviously I was a skier too, and I surf and stuff, but I was a stoner, I used to rock, durags with weed on them. And I used to,
yes.
You know what I mean? Shit like that.
Real edgy stuff.
Three of the most iconic skiers, Candide Thovex, Mikhail Deschneaux and Tanner Hall were all really big stoners. If you watch the Oakley team movie from about 2002, Mikhail Deschneaux, he's got a Rasta, a full-on dancehall track to it. And there's flashes in his pipe run of him blowing big O's and his big plants at home, in the background. And that's in an Oakley movie, you know what I mean? That was a huge deal, back then. And Candide Thovex, he called probably almost 10 of his movies that he made in a row called Rastafari. He was a really big stoner. He wasn't as prominent at exposing it. He didn't smoke on camera and stuff like Tanner and Mikhail did. But, all of his pro model stuff was Rasta color. You know what I mean? It all had psychedelic art on it. And so these people were probably the most influential people in my life. Same with a couple of pro skaters and pro surfers like Ozzy Wright, and kind of psychedelic and punk rock was kind of what was my early childhood kind of influences from skate, ski, surf, snowboard, and some motocross movies.
On the note of the connection with those extreme sports and also your background as a professional athlete, why is it that winter sports and cannabis seem to go so hand in hand? What's the relationship there?
Yeah, we used to smoke copious amounts of, I'd wake up. This is when I was living in Whistler. We'd smoke on the fucking drive there. Then we'd hotbox the gondola. We call it the gondola because we hotbox it so bad. And then, you'd do 3 or 4 runs. And then you'd stop in the trees and smoke another doobie. And then, maybe later in the day, you'd hotbox the gondola again. So you just constantly, obviously, and you perform at a high level, you're jumping off big cliffs and you're doing laps and you're going really fast. You're not stopping unless you're smoking a joint, but it's top to bottom. You know what I mean? Full on.
Yeah.
And so you're just constantly on the grind. And when you're on that grind, it's a really good way to break it up is to stop in the trees. And most big North American ski resorts in the trees, there's pot huts that people have built and teepees and all sorts of shit. You know what I mean? So stoner culture is a huge part of action sports. And the other big influential moment was when my mum gave me the original Up in Smoke Cheech and Chong movie. So when I was probably 12 or 13, my parents had friends that were cultivators that I remember one of them came over and my dad told me that he was going to jail for growing plants. And I'm like, what kind of plants? And he's like, oh, bad ones. And I was like, oh, okay. And that kind of stuck with me for a while. Obviously, my dad wasn't anti-cannabis in any way, shape, or form because he had friends that were cultivators. But you know what I mean? Like, I didn't really understand what it was, and probably till I was probably 11 or 12. And then that Cheech and Chong, which my mum says was probably the beginning of the downfall of me personally. For a while there, I was a jock. But anyways, I love cannabis, and it's been a really awesome part of my life.
Well, I know you're making a big name for yourself with some large-scale cannabis protests here in Australia, the likes of which we haven't really seen before. So let's first talk about the projection stunt on April 20, 2022. You alluded to it already. You're dealing with the legal implications of that.
Yeah.
Tell us about what went down on that day.
Well, we had 3 different spots that we set up. We had one at the International Cruise Terminal, one in our hotel, and then one on the south pylon of the Sydney Harbour Bridge. Craze had gone there a couple of weeks early to do a test to make sure that the lasers that we got could project that far over water, because we'd never done that before. We did a bunch of testing with them earlier on other buildings and stuff around the neighborhoods or in the back of like industrial areas. And we did a couple of tests at old abandoned drive-in movies. We tried to measure it out at a similar distance, which is ironically, it was about 420 meters. From the hotel to the thing. It was like 1 or 2 meters off. It was quite funny. So we projected for about an hour, and then the cops came to our hotel, and then we got raided, and then they took us away. So they were going to arrest everybody, but then we just kind of like fessed up, and then, that was our responsibility to kind of, if we do stuff like this. But ironically, this is only the first time that I've been arrested. Alec got, like a move along ordinance the time before when he did the test. The cops actually came to his house, and they didn't know really what they could charge him with or what the bylaw meant. And Alec kind of did that to make sure that we had a duty of care over the other people that we were working with, because we wanted to test to see if we actually would get arrested before we did it. He didn't actually get arrested, but then obviously on that day we did get arrested. So shit happens, I guess. It is what it is.
So, I mean, what is the status of the legal proceedings against you? Like, I understand you could have basically just paid an $1,100 fine and be done with it, but you've seen an opportunity to kind of set a constitutional precedent here.
Yeah, that's potentially what our argument will be. We're still kind of up in the air about how we're going to do it, but that has been heavily discussed. We have been in correspondence with all of the attorney generals of all of the states of Australia, which you have to notify them if you're arguing any kind of constitutional law disagreement or whatever it is. So we did that. We got permission from all of them. A couple of them, I think one of their representatives is actually coming to the court case next month. It's on the 29th of August. So we're facing like an $1,100 fine, but I think there's a potential criminal conviction, but nobody really knows. So the Chasers did a similar thing to this after Scott Morrison did the big Everest race on the Opera House. That was kind of what have inspired us. The Chasers went to the Opera House and actually projected "advertise here" with Alan Jones's phone number underneath it. They did that, and that was kind of like what inspired me to come up with this idea, right? We were going to do it a few years ago in collusion with another stunt, but we couldn't figure out, we didn't know about these laser cubes that we found, which are just the most incredible. They're like this big, and they look like a camera, and they just project like some really fucking cool stuff. So basically, it's a bylaw that says that we've displayed or distributed an advertisement on the Opera House grounds. The Opera House is, from what I've been told, the only registered trademarked building in Australia, and you basically need permission to use it in any way, shape, or form for any kind of advertising. If you had a photo of your day cruise company that works on Sydney Harbour, if you had a photo of your cruise ship and they had just the Opera House in the background, they would get a cease and desist order sent from the Opera House Trust to them to say that they're using the Opera House for commercial gain and that they need to either pay this or they need to take it down. Now, if it's the Opera House and the Harbour Bridge from the back, then that doesn't count.
Right.
So it's like some weird, like kind of law in the middle there. So it's a bylaw. But the thing, that thing that I'm arguing also, they're trying to get us for commercial gain. An advertisement is for commercial gain, right? Now, there was no commercial attachment to this project, and there's never been any commercial attachment to pretty much any of the projects that we've ever done, maybe one or two. But in general, it was always about the who are we hurting ideology of just kind of trying to make people aware that who are we hurting, alcohol and tobacco are just as bad, if not worse for you. And that really it should be our God-given right to be able to smoke cannabis recreationally and legally if we want to.
Obviously, the trouble with the law hasn't stopped you from scaling up your plans on 420 this year, taking, essentially a faux army platoon with tanks through the CBD of Sydney, skewering that failed war on drugs and asking that question that you mentioned, who are we hurting? So tell us about this year's 420 event.
So this year we did a motorcade. We hired a big stretch limo. We hired a tank that's called a squirrel. It's not a tank because it's not on the. I think they're called tillers. It's actually got wheels. So it's like a small kind of tank with a gun on top. And then we had a big Army Hummer. And then we had another Army vehicle, which my dad actually drove, which was pretty cool. And cool. We had Lad Bible following us. We had Jeremy Buckingham come from the Legalised Cannabis Party. Shout out to Jeremy. We did another stunt with him the other day, about 3 or 4 days ago, actually, where we took a cannabis plant, a fake one, into Parliament and did an interview with him. And now the fake plant is sitting on his balcony right behind where they do the press conference 3 or 4 times a week for the New South Wales Premier. So he's going to come out and pretend to water it on camera. So it's, we're playing around. He's a really interesting character. So he came with us, obviously Lad Bible, and we drove the motorcade around to all the big media releases and basically gave them a media pack that kind of presented information about why cannabis legalization would be good for things. And we gave it to all of the big news networks. We gave it to a couple of politicians that sit in office. And that was really interesting. And we were also trying to protest for the drug driving laws, the unjust ones, where, if you're a medicinal patient and you swab from cannabis, there's no chart of tolerance.
Yeah, they're not checking for impairment. It's just if you have it in your system.
So that's why we have all of these, the RBT test been around for 30, 40 years. And there's a 0.05 drinking rate that you're allowed. And then they say 2 beers, first hour and 1 beer after hour,
Yeah.
So that's a fair gauge of how wasted you are and, if you can operate the vehicle. But with the cannabis, I actually just recently got swabbed and got done. And I can't really argue it, but I wasn't impaired and I hadn't smoked since the night before. And now I lose my license. Alec Craze, he got done and then his lawyer told him to plead guilty so he could get a work license. And then he got a work license. And then because he pleaded guilty to a drug charge, he had a master security license. So the cops came after him and took away his master security license. And now 10 plus people don't have a job because he can't operate his security business. It's outrageous. And there's probably a million cases like that, This year's stunt was a bit more about trying to raise awareness, obviously, that we want recreational cannabis to be legalized in Australia and come forth. And we want the tax excise to go towards hospitals and roads and schools, and then obviously rehabilitation programs for more hardcore drug users, because I think that all drugs should be treated as a health matter, not a criminal matter. And I personally think that, maybe not full legalization of all drugs, but definitely decriminalisation, which is happening in the ACT. It's happening now. You get the drug diversion in Queensland for all drugs as of a certain date. That's great progression. And obviously now the Greens have this bill in place that they're going to try and introduce it for federal recreational cannabis. And we kind of feel that Alec and I, hopefully we've contributed towards that movement.
Oh, 100%. And it's something that, there's limited activity in this space from the general public. And that's something that you've kind of been loud and proud about, is that you've got to put yourself out there. You've got to take these risks. So, I mean, in a way, what's your kind of call to action for people putting themselves out there? You've spoken about this before.
The call to action is basically, I think you need to write to your local MPs, like both local, state and federal, write a formal letter and basically say, if you're for cannabis and you're for legalization, then we'd like to see some movement of change towards that. And if you want our votes, then you need to do the will of the people. Attend protests, have conversations about it. Word of mouth is still very powerful. I think that the perception of cannabis over the last 5 years has heavily changed in Australia. I think it's become quite, I'd say, semi-mainstream. It's not as mainstream as obviously America or Canada or even most places in Europe, but it's not judged as much anymore. Whereas I think before there was a big stigma towards the negativity of cannabis. And obviously I think Australian stoner culture with the orchie bottle and the chop bowl that with the dirty water probably doesn't help manifest an amazing image of, a functioning cannabis user. I'm not really hating it, so I'm just observing, and that's just kind of what I see. I think that's progressing a lot now. I think now you see glass bongs, you see people doing dabs, you see different people have got strains, and because of the medical system, it's all progressed, in leaps and bounds over the last 5 to 10 years. I remember 8 or 9, even 7, 8 years ago, trying to find a really nice glass bong. I went to a lot of different places, Nimbin, all sorts of places, and it was quite difficult to find one.
Well, one of the things I've always noticed about Australia, compared to my time in Canada, is there's a lot of like skulls and weed leaves and things like that don't necessarily appeal to a broader array of people. Whereas in Canada, you go find these beautiful like rose gold grinders and amazing glass bongs that, just your everyday type of person uses. So seeing that difference definitely helps enhance people's okayness or the normalization of cannabis.
100%. And it's interesting to see as it progresses, people of my parents' age or older, obviously not necessarily my parents' friends group, because most of them are pretty bohemian. But just, even the mom and pop people, I think the stigma is slowly changing, but I think we still have quite a ways to go personally.
Just back to the 420 stunt from this year, what was the response from the media as you kind of went around and presented this information?
We pretty much only got good responses because basically we didn't deface the Opera House. It was just projections of light, right? The Opera House is an iconic architectural marvel, and it's one of my favorite buildings in the whole world. I think it's beautiful. I think its location is second to none. It's one of the most beautiful harbors on planet Earth. And we would never deface it in any way. Like, no hating on the guys that tag no war on the top, that's graffiti. And like, I love graffiti and I'm all for protest, but me personally and Alec, we wouldn't deface property in the name of something like this. It's not a positive perception of what the message is. Do you know what I mean? It takes away from it because there's some kind of vandalism attached to it, which then people see negativisms in. The majority of the stunts that we do, whether we put 100 fake weed plants through Sydney or we built a 26-foot fake cannabis Christmas tree in Martin Place, each one was tongue in cheek. It was Aussie larrikinism, and it was trying to be a little bit, kind of making people talk, as opposed to these kind of climate protesters that are, stopping traffic and lighting fucking flares. And I'm all for protest, but I think that the way that they go about it personally, as someone who is a fellow activist in his own way, I think that when you do stuff in a similar way that Banksy does it, where it's kind of like thought-provoking, it's intelligent, and it's tongue-in-cheek, I think you get a much better response and a much bigger impact on the society as a whole, because they feel for your cause, as opposed to going, oh, fuck that hippie or whatever the stigma that's associated with whoever did the publicity or protest, you know what I mean? And to go back to your original question, we got a pretty good response from the media, actually. We didn't really get any negative feedback, obviously, because we didn't deface the Opera House. It was tongue-in-cheek. It was fun. High Times did a big article about it, all sorts of news channels. So when we actually did get arrested, they confiscated a lot of our footage. And so we didn't really get to do the press release to the point that we normally would have. So I was a little bit disappointed on the day, to be honest, because Alec was locked up all day. Alec didn't accept the bail conditions. So I had to try and scramble to get all it. It was a bit of a shit show, to be honest. And then so we didn't get as much press as we thought. But after we got the mention in the court, then it started to blow up, and then people around the world started talking about us.
You mentioned that these don't have huge commercial interests attached to them. Obviously, that was an important part of your defense with the projections. One of the things I've noticed in Victoria, like we've got this Drive Change program happening at the moment, trying to get these laws that you mentioned changed. And recently, Drive Change did a crowdfunding Kickstarter to try and get more money for the campaign. Now, I think personally, the people that should be funding this campaign are the cannabis companies, because it's in their interest to get these laws changed so more people can use cannabis.
And that's what we're working with cannabis companies to try and do that. We did actually work with Drive Change on that campaign, and we actually put up these billboards all through Western Sydney that talked about our evidence-free RBT. So we do work closely with Drive Change. We have worked with a couple of other cannabis companies, and we're actually in the works of potentially doing something a little bit grandiose. So I think it's a little bit it's great in essence to say that, and I do agree with you 100,000%. But I think because a lot of these companies, they're worried about pissing off the TGA and getting a $100,000-$200,000 lawsuit against them. And also, I have a wild life, so does Alec. So certain companies don't want to, be associated with wildness. But this is kind of different for us. This is our professional side. We take this very seriously. Obviously, we've been doing it for 8 years. We've spent probably spent over $100,000 between both of us on doing these stunts, all the time filming them, and it all costs quite a lot of money. But we think that the cause is greater than, and I think that we're starting to see change. There's a huge amount of momentum. I think a lot of these other politicians are seeing that being pro-cannabis is good for them to be able to get more votes from the youth. And I think that, if you look at places like Canada and, California and even Thailand, that's been a huge legalization. There's been a huge tourist attraction. It's rebuilt the economy. I haven't been to Thailand before. I'm not one to comment on their legalization rollout because I'm not the expert on their laws. But it seems to have had a good effect on the country. Obviously there's going to be negative ramifications from everything, especially on something like on that level where the society changes from like you're going to go to jail and potentially get executed if you had enough pot. You'd probably have to have a lot, to now full legalization and people smoking in the streets and stuff like that. So I think that you need a little bit of legality attached to it, like how in Amsterdam you can't smoke and drink in the same premises, stuff like that, little precautionary measures. I'm all for a libertarian system, but a little bit of control is good for shutting up all the naysayers.
That's true. Yeah, the regulation will allow it to be more functional and exist in a world where there are going to be people who will continue to be against it.
Yeah, 100%.
So I'm really keen to get to know your business ventures a little bit and understand your place in the cannabis industry. But I'm hoping that before we do that, you might be up for playing a little game.
Fantastic. No problem.
This game is called Famous Wills and Williams. In this quiz, I'll provide you with hints that should lead you to naming a famous person named Will, William, or Williams. The first few questions will have an answer that features it as a first name. The last few will feature it as a surname. And for each question, there are 2 hints, and feel free to answer before I've gotten through them if you do know who it is. So how do you feel about that?
Yeah, no problem. I can do that.
All right, let's do this. Star of the Men in Black franchise. Slapped Oh, you got it. Arguably the greatest playwright England has ever produced.
William Shakespeare.
Star of Anchorman.
Will Ferrell.
Royal Prince, son of Charles and Diana.
Prince William.
Captain of the Starship Enterprise.
William Shatner.
Scottish knight who famously led the Scottish War of Independence. Mel Gibson portrayed... You got it. American singer-songwriter, notorious cannabis and political advocate. Oh, you're killing it. American former professional tennis player. One of the greatest of all time.
Tennis players. Oh, Serena and Venus Williams.
You got it. American actor and comedian who passed away in 2014. Aladdin, Patch Adams, Jumanji.
Oh, Robin Williams.
UK singer, most popular in the late 90s and early 2000s. Rock DJ.
Robin Williams.
You are killing this. Lucky last, music producer who has collaborated with Justin Timberlake, Kendrick Lamar, Frank Ocean, one half of the Neptunes, and lead vocalist of NERD.
Not Pharrell.
It is Pharrell Williams. That is 12 out of 12. You know your famous Wills and Williams. Thank you for playing.
No problem. That's a good game. I like that. That's interesting.
So as we head towards the end of the show, I'd like to talk about your business ventures. Now, we're very much waiting for the slow wheels of cannabis reform to move in Australia, and I understand you're looking a little bit more broadly in a business sense around the world. Tell me about Byron Bay CBD.
Yeah, we've launched that in America. I'm just waiting for some more of doing the money raise so we can launch in Europe and then do it properly in America. We did a soft launch, sold out about a bunch of product, and now basically I'm waiting to re-up and do it correctly. I just did a soft launch with about 50,000 US dollars of product into the market, sold it over a month or two, and basically just to kind of test the waters to see if CBD wasn't as oversaturated as I thought it was.
Very cool, very cool. Because yeah, their floodgates have kind of opened up in the States with CBD. You can get it at the corner store, get it at the gas station.
It's very oversaturated, but there is money to be made if you market it the right way and get to the right people. Because there's 300 million people, even in an oversaturated market. There's new energy drinks coming out all the time, and they're all successful. So, with a population of over 350 million people, there's a niche for you that you can find. But that's moving along pretty well. And then we'll start scaling and then look into the new markets of Europe and Thailand, and then some additional stuff in North America.
Very, very cool, man. And tell us about Tioga Green. This is your California cannabis dispensary venture.
So Tioga Green is the dispensary that I started with my two friends, Justin Madru and Corey Zyler, who's the operator and the founder. We used to be on the Freeride World Tour together, 10 years ago or something like that, maybe a little bit longer. Time flies when you're having fun. And we started it 3 and a bit years ago, like end of 2009, like September 2019. It's right at the bottom of Yosemite National Park, which is the second biggest tourist attraction in California. The average spend of each customer is higher in our dispensary than any other dispensary.
Wow.
So it's doing reasonably well. The market in California is quite competitive, but we're lucky that we're out in the middle of nowhere. But then there's a lot of influx of people that go to Mammoth Mountain. It's the biggest ski resort in California, is probably 30 miles away, 32 miles. So that's one of the biggest tourist attractions in California. So, California's got 38 million people or something like that, So we're doing reasonably well. And then we just opened another cannabis flower company called Pheno Hunts, which is pretty amazing. I'll give you a video link. You can link to it. So we're currently in about 10 stores. We just have done a supply agreement with one of the best growers on planet Earth, multiple Cannabis Cup winners, yada, yada, yada. I'm sworn to secrecy. I'm not allowed to tell people where our flower actually comes from. But if people knew, they would be probably pretty mind blown. But that's doing reasonably well. Hopefully we'll expand, or we're going to expand. And that now that we have a really good supply, we're going to expand and hopefully be in upwards of 100 dispensaries by the end of the year. So everything is moving in a positive direction. Now the majors starts. I've battled in the high school league. I've done college. I've played in the minors. Now it's time for real work, and we're going to scale these businesses to a really high level. At the same time, I really want to give back to the community, give back to people that are researching medical cannabis for cancer and for different ailments that can really help in the medical game. We've got another couple of side projects in biotech and pharmaceutical manufacturing to do with CBD and to do with cannabis, based out of Florida with a company called Magellan Pharmaceuticals, which we purchased 20% of about 5 months ago. And so they're some of the leading extraction experts on planet Earth. And basically, they just need a bit more money to be able to scale. So I'm a little bit, I think now I wouldn't say I'm scared or worrisome, but, I'm a little bit excited to see where this next phase goes, because as one of my best friends, Brandon, told me once, he said, most people celebrate the day they raise money. It should be the day that you fret, because now you must return that investment with profit. Money goes quickly. If you look at the Can Group, they just burnt through upwards of $200 million,
There has been a lot of money blown through in cannabis over the last few years, and there will continue to be. It's such a wild west. So it's really great that you're throwing yourself into all these things.
It is a Wild West, and the taxes in California and in America are just astronomical. I read a statistic the other day that only 28% of the dispensaries in California are actually profitable, which is kind of crazy. So, hopefully federal legalization in America will open up doors to a multi-trillion-dollar industry. As soon as you're allowed to ship products over state lines, then it's going to go gangbusters. Just to give you a perspective, you can't cash any kind of cannabis money into the banks. My colleague just lost his third or fourth bank account. When Corey went to go pay for our cannabis control license from the Cannabis Control Bureau in Sacramento, he had to take $53,000 in cash to pay for it.
That's just so risky for everyone, isn't it?
MasterCard just announced that they're not allowing debit transactions from cannabis companies, which is kind of crazy because they're a federal institution. So basically our dispensary is just built around a giant safe. And it's all cash, and it's pretty crazy.
It is, because it still feels a bit like the quote unquote old days of drug dealing.
If federal legalization goes through in America, Joe Biden talks about it, but action over words. Like Kamala Harris, as a district prosecutor, sent more people to jail than almost any prosecutor in the whole country. And then now she's talking about cannabis reform. It's pretty hypocritical from my perspective. So I think politicians, they talk a big game, but then I don't think they have much follow through. I think this Greens bill in Australia is really interesting. I think that if the Greens and the legalised cannabis party can come together, there is a potential chance of it going through on a state level. The proposed bill to legalise recreational cannabis that the Greens is trying to put in federal parliament, it's a great step in the right direction. Do I personally think it'll go through? I think that's kind of pushing a really, really, really big bunch of bricks up a hill. But I hope I'm proven wrong.
Well, Will, we've reached close to the end of our time together, and I've been so grateful for your insights today. The effort and energy and enthusiasm you put into this space is really important, and I think will encourage other people to put themselves out there. The final segment for this show is called Pauls of Wisdom, and this is where you just offer one key takeaway for the listener, whether it's a call to action, a piece of advice, or just a fact. What is your Paul of Wisdom?
The best advice I ever heard from all of the different forums and all the famous people I've heard speak, from Anthony Robbins to Snoop Dogg to all sorts of random people that all over Richard Branson, yada, bullshit, was from a gentleman named Andrew Montel. Now, Andrew Montel created Acclaim. He was a really big pillar in the Australian hip-hop scene, and he created one of my favorite magazines called Acclaim. Then he launched Complex into Australia. Just a G, And he spoke at one of these, this carbon forum about 5 or 6 years ago, and he said, ladies and gentlemen, kids out there, I for years and years, I ran a magazine. I had 3 other jobs. I put all my effort into this. I lived in this shitty apartment. I'd bring girls home and they'd look at my shitty bathroom and they'd just look at me and go, how the fuck do you run a magazine? Yada, yada, yada. And he basically just said, whatever it takes, that's the only way to make things happen. So I think that a lot of people get caught up in what should be and what shouldn't be. Like the journey of 1,000 miles starts but with one step. And if you want to make things happen, you want to see change in the world, you want to see your dreams come to fruition, you got to work hard, you got to put your nuts on the chopping block, and you just got to go out there and make it happen. And I know that's a lot more difficult than it says, but all these people in history, from Genghis Khan to, Alexander the Great to Thomas Edison to Richard Branson, at one point they were a nobody. And then now they've become these iconic people of history because they went out and they made shit happen. Some people have a better card that they're drawn than other people, but at the end of the day, we still have the same 24 hours and anything is possible. You must be willing to put in copious amounts of hard work. You must be willing to put up with people that you don't want to put up with when you're collaborating in certain situations. You got to check your ego at the door and just put your nuts on the grindstone.
No, I love it, man. Like Kevin Garnett said, anything is possible. Well, Will Stolk, there will be links in the episode show notes below for Tioga Green, Byron Bay CBD, Willy's World podcast, as well as finding you on Instagram at Willy's World 69. Is there anywhere else our listeners can get in touch with you?
YouTube, but that's all the pretty standard stuff. Thank you for your time, mate. I really appreciate what you're doing for the cannabis culture. It's one of the better, more fun podcasts I've done for quite a while. So thank you for your knowledge. Thank you for your contribution to stoner culture and to the progressing the legalization movement in this oppressed world.
Really appreciate you, Will. Thank you so much for your time. We'll be sure to stay in touch.
Thank you very much, my friend. You have a lovely day. Bye, mate.
Give and Toke Cannabis Conversations is written and produced by me, Paul. Music written and produced by Big Mike. Follow us on Instagram at Give and Toke or get in touch by emailing giveandtoke@gmail.com. All opinions expressed by program guests are solely their current opinions and do not necessarily reflect the position of Give and Toke. Content discussed in this show does not constitute medical advice. Cannabis is not legal everywhere, so please be aware of local laws.